Hello there, this is Dr. Dell again, Craig Hain, and we're talking about the Teaching Math book. These are the videos. This is the third video, and in this video, I want to talk to you about a solution that I propose for a 21st century math curriculum that I believe will meet the needs of virtually all of our students. And actually, that's 5 chapters, chapters 5 through 9 of your book. I will talk about the math ed delivery system I believe we should be using. I'm going to tell you how this could be a financial salvation for our high schools. I'm going to talk about something that should be of interest to every parent and adult called the Matheracy Imperative, is what I call it. And finally, what are the ultimate benefits to both you and our society? So there's 5 chapters I want to kind of briefly discuss here. And we'll start with the modern curriculum that I'm going to propose to you on page 59. Now, I'm actually proposing a 10-tier program. The first 6 tiers are the ones that most students would take that are going to go into science and engineering. The last 4 tiers are strictly for future professional mathematicians. And I believe, and I talk a lot about that in the book, and I would urge you to read that if you have a student that is quite talented in math and contemplating a career as a professional math student. Mostly here I'm going to talk about the 6 tiers. I'll talk about the last 4 tiers in the last video. Now, the first 2 tiers we've already talked about. That is the foundation course. I showed you the table of contents for that. We cover algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and how to use the scientific calculator to solve what I consider to be most practical mathematics problems that you run into in non-professional technical careers. Now, I'm not talking finances now. That's a separate subject, and there will be separate training on that. Then what happens when a student finishes the foundation course? Well, some students, in fact, will stop right there. When you finish the foundation course, you're going to know more math than about 95% of the U.S. population. You're going to be ready pretty much to go to a tech school or go into a non-professional technical career, and that may be all you want to know about math. Um, Now, some people say, well, who's capable of doing that? And my answer to that is anybody that can play complicated games of any kind can do the practical math foundation. But then the question is, what about students that think, well, maybe I'm going to go on into science and technology and engineering. What should I do? Well, then we have a third tier then that follows up. And guess what we cover in the third tier? You guessed it, algebra, geometry, and trig. Once again, only now we're going to do it at a deeper level. Now, the first foundation course, as you know, didn't have a textbook with it. It had a notebook that you've learned about on our website that included then exercises and solutions to the exercises. But I actually use a book in the third tier. And the book that I use in the third tier is by a man named Dr. George Simmons. Now, I want to tell you about that book because if you get nothing else out of my book and the videos, then it should be an acquaintance with this gentleman. George Simmons is a wonderful mathematics teacher and a mathematician. I first taught out of George Simmons' book when I taught an advanced course in topology and modern analysis, which was a first-year graduate course at a school where I taught many years ago, and that's how I became acquainted with him. And then some years later, Professor Simmons wrote books on differential equations and on calculus. And then in I think it was 86, he came out with this book, Pre-Calculus Mathematics in a Nutshell. And because I knew him and admired him so much, I got a copy of it and read it, and I loved it. And I thought if I ever would go back to teaching high school mathematics, this would be the book I would use. And I've recommended it ever since to various math teachers. And I don't know that any school has ever adopted this book as a textbook. I tend to doubt it because, believe it or not, this book covers algebra, geometry, and trigonometry, and it all does it in 120 pages. And I will also tell you this, that it covers all of the algebra, geometry, and trig that you would probably ever need to go on into calculus. In fact, in his preface, Dr. Simmons says, most college mathematics teachers would be overjoyed and astounded if their students came to them from high school in full command of this much background material. But most high school graduates today do not even come close. And I believe that to be true. As a matter of fact, I have yet to meet myself personally a high school graduate who knows anywhere near all that's in this book. And as a matter of fact, I could go through this book and pick out problems that he gives as exercises to the students, and I could make up a test of 10 problems out of this book that most high school math teachers would have a very hard time passing, let alone their students that have graduated. This is a fantastic book. It covers all of the important things you need to know in those three subjects, and it does it in depth, including proofs. It's just an amazing thing, and I just can't recommend it enough. So if you decide that you're not interested in what I'm telling you and you want to do the more standard thing and you don't want to get involved with me with the foundation, that's fine. I would highly recommend that you get yourself a copy of this book. Go to Amazon and get it. It's about 20 bucks and it is just phenomenal. Now, it is not, in my opinion, a good self-study book. If you're a homeschool teacher, don't buy this book and give it to your student and say, here, now learn math. It really is too condensed for that. It needs somebody to really explain these things in more detail and lead them through. This is a condensation, so to speak, of what you need to know. Some students could learn from it and wouldn't need any help, but most students are going to need help. And that's why I use it in my Tier 3, where I, of course, uh, teach out of this book. This is the book I use, and then I have videos on all the different topics. I assign problems out of the book, and then, of course, I give solutions to them, as does Dr. Simmons. Now, he makes some points that are worth repeating. What he talks about here, for example, is why so many students emerge from geometry courses with feelings of confusion and relief. And he says, why is that? And I'm going to read from this. You could get a copy of the book and read it yourself. But one of the reasons that they have this confusion and perhaps disgust is that they have been ground down by complicated trivialities and offered little compensating insight into the geometric ideas that really matter. They've been bombarded with innumerable nitpicking definitions and also with elaborate, boring step reason, step reason, step reason proofs of statements that in many cases are obvious to begin with. And at that stage, who can doubt the truth of such a statement as this? Given any 3 points on a line, one is between the other two. When asked to examine a proof, the natural reaction of an intelligent student is irritation and impatience. And he is right. And I might add, she is right. Their textbooks are often seen to be written by the kind of person, and we all know such people, who talk so much and says so little that we will soon stop listening. All this tends to kill their interest in geometry long before they even reach the meat of the subject. One of the big problems, and the root of the problem, is a slavish adherence to the doctrine of deductive reasoning. This is the notion that knowledge is somehow not legitimate or genuine until it has been organized into an elaborate formal system of theorems that are carefully deduced from a small number of axioms or self-evident truths. Now, deductive reasoning is an interesting idea that educated people ought to know about, just as they should know something about representative government and internal combustion engines and other human inventions. It was very popular among philosophers and scientists in the 17th century and was applied by them to physics, ethics, and other unlikely subjects. Science shook off its grip 200 years ago, but geometry has continued to be strangled by this outmoded philosophy or philosophical doctrine down to the present day, and so on and so forth. Now, I would recommend, in fact, that you buy his book if you do nothing more than read the preface and the 3 introductions to the 3 chapters. I could not agree more with him, as a matter of fact. And in fact, I may even just copy them sometime and put them on my website. Well, in any event, this is the book that I use, and we cover the 3 subjects in Tier 3, and it takes about a year to do that for most students. I figure 1 year, or well, actually 6 to 9 months to go through this. And that's what we do in Tier 3. Now, what do you suppose we do in Tier 4? Well, guess what? In Tier 4, gee, algebra, geometry, and trig again. Only now I just call it 2. What happens is the first time I go through Simmons' book, I only do about 80% of it because there's some things in it that are so deep that I think it's still premature, even though it's the second time through. So I put that off till tier 3, or well, tier 4 rather, the third time. So we review the 80% we've done, and then we do the new material that's in his book. And it's just a phenomenal thing. Some of the stuff he does is amazing. Now, here's what I do in tier 4, though, that is really sets it apart from all other treatments of mathematics you're going to run into anywhere, and that is complex numbers and the way I treat them. Complex numbers are an extremely important number system in science and engineering. And as a matter of fact, you're not going to really fully understand trigonometry and algebra until you understand complex numbers. And so I cover that in tier 4, and I do it in a way that I've never seen done anywhere else before in anything resembling an elementary mathematics course. In fact, most students don't study complex numbers until they get well into their college curriculum. And I consider this to be a gaping hole in the standard high school math curriculum today. In fact, I just think it's just almost unconscionable that we don't teach this sooner. And you'll understand all about that once you understand complex numbers and how important they are and how they're used. Now, in Tier 5, I cover calculus. There's two kinds. There's differential and integral. They work together. And I do this, most students can go through this in about 2 to 3 months. Why can they do calculus that fast, and am I really covering it? Well, as a matter of fact, this is not going to be what I call your father's course in calculus. What we're going to do is use this great tool, Mathematica, to do it, because the facts are, in traditional calculus courses, most time is spent learning manual calculating techniques for different types of calculus problems that are no longer used because the tools do it for you. And no mathematician in his right mind today would do an old-fashioned manual calculus calculation with today's tools. At least they wouldn't do it if they're on my payroll. Now, after calculus comes something called differential equations. The truth is they kind of go together. Differential equations are just equations that involve derivatives and integrals, which is what you learned about in calculus. And these are the workhorses of modern science and engineering. Most models in science and engineering are based on differential equations. And so that's what you have to learn if you're going to do science. And I teach that in Tier 6. Again, how can I do that? In high school, this is unheard of in high school probably, and the reason is Mathematica and in its manifestation in Wolfram Alpha. It's just an incredible tool, and you can learn all kinds of things, how to solve all kinds of differential equations using that tool. As a matter of fact, traditional differential equations, when they're taught, has a set of tools that only solve certain kinds of differential equations. And in fact, they're not the ones you run into all the time. Mathematica is just an indispensable tool that engineers use today, or something like it. Then what I cover in this chapter is the timeline for the 6 tiers. Now, there's no magical timeline for it, and you can read the chapter on it because it's all self-paced. But I would say an average typical student that's going to go on into college and go into science and engineering is going to take about 4 years to go through these 6 tiers. And you're going to start with a foundation, which is about a 3-month program. Then you're going to do tier 3, which is going to be about 6 months for them. That's the first year. Then you're going to do tiers 3 and 4. In year 2, you're not going to finish tier 4. That'll spill over into year 3. You'll do tier 5. And then in year 4, you'll finish tier 5 and do tier 6. And now that's not written in stone, but that is kind of what I would think an average student would do. Some might take an extra year or two. You can start in the foundation in the 7th grade or the 8th grade. In fact, I'd recommend most students start in about the 7th grade. So it's very easy to get through these 6 tiers, and that includes differential equations, remember. Once you finish the 6 tiers, you're ready to go to the best engineering schools in the country. You're ready to go to MIT, you're ready to go to Purdue, you're ready to go to Caltech, and you're ready to go into science and engineering. As a matter of fact, if you complete these 6 tiers, you might not have to take any math if you just want to go into science and engineering. You probably will want to take some more linear algebra and some things like that, but you won't have to take a lot more math. Now, throughout this book, there are interludes, and these interludes are about specific things that I teach, mostly in the foundation course, at least the first 4 interludes are, and they give you food for thought, things to think about if you're a teacher. And then they have a link where you go to a website to watch a video on that interlude, and those videos are on the CD that you have, so you don't have to go to the website. Now what I want to talk about is Chapter 6, the High School Math Ed Delivery System. Remember what I said earlier in the math triad. You need to have proper pedagogy. You need to have a student that can study self-paced and interactive. Well, thanks to technology today, we can do things completely differently. And now, the difference in how we can deliver math today is as profound as many of the other technologies that are affecting all of our lives, particularly the students. Cell phones, Google, Facebook, Kindle, iPads, and so on. These are the tools we have today. So what can we do? Well, we should be delivering our mathematics in a self-paced, interactive form using probably the internet and these tools. And if you start analyzing, and I give some examples here of the cost of this, it turns out to be a lot less expensive than the traditional approach. And I won't go into that in this video. You can read the book on that. But that leads into Chapter 7, which is the financial salvation for our high schools. Now, we know today that we're living in perilous economic times, and most of businesses and most institutions are under financial pressure. And that's certainly true of education. And so, what are we going to do about it? Well, the facts are, if you deliver education online, and particularly that's true of mathematics, then you can actually reduce your delivery cost by probably as much as 50%, maybe more, and you'll increase your quality dramatically. So what we can have with modern delivery systems is quality and productivity will go way up, and our total costs are going to go way down. And now, you may say, well, what does that do to the teacher? Does that mean the teacher is no longer important in mathematics? And the answer to that is no, the teacher's important, but his role or her role will change. And I say here on page 81, do teachers still have a role to play? And the answer is absolutely, better than ever. And I think you should read this to get more details on it. But the facts are, I think this will be a boon to teachers. It'll make them more effective. It'll make their teaching more satisfying. It'll let them do things they can't do now that they would like to do and should be doing. And it's just a phenomenal win-win-win situation. In Chapter 8, this is aimed really at adults and parents and really to everybody. And I talk about something I call the matheracy imperative. I put matheracy in quotes because it's not a word, it's one I made up. And it's a similar word to matherit. And the bottom line of it is, I claim that today in our modern economy, and I call it the third wave economy based on Alvin Toffler's great model that he set up in his 1980 book called The Third Wave. Today, in our service economy, you can have people that are properly trained making very, very good incomes. As a matter of fact, that's what our modern service economy is all going to consist of, is people that are highly trained and doing really, really well financially. But these people have to be educated properly. That's the key to the whole thing. Back in the old days, in the second wave economy, you could have semi-skilled workers without very much education. If they were literate, that's about all it took, and they could hold down pretty well-paid jobs. Now that's not true anymore. Those jobs are going by the wayside rapidly. So what we have to do today, if you want your child, if we want our students to really be productive in the new economy and to make really good livings, we've got to give them a great education. Now, literacy was all you needed in the second wave, but you need matheracy in the third wave. They've got to know mathematics because, as I discuss in this book in detail, most jobs today are done by a combination of human and machine. You put them together to get the job done. And in order to operate a lot of these new technical machines, you need a math background, and you need the kind of abilities to think that mathematicians learn when they go through the math that we're teaching them. So that is the message of Chapter 8 is if you want your student to be successful in the economy today, probably the best way to assure that'll happen is to make sure they are matherit, that they know mathematics. And then the question becomes, well, what is all of this going to cost, and what are the benefits? In fact, benefits is how I start this out. That's what we all care about. And I talk a lot about that, and I give you some models in this on it to think about, a thought experiment. And the bottom line of the whole thing is, today, we can deliver much higher quality math education than we are currently delivering for much less cost. So it's going to be a win-win-win thing. The number one winners will be our students are going to be getting a better education. And the number two winners are going to be our taxpayers that are spending less money. And oddly enough, number 3, our winners will be our educators, who will actually be doing a much better job and enjoying it more. Now, in interlude number 5, I actually give an interlude about complex numbers that is would be appropriate not for foundation people like the first 4 interludes were, but this is for people going to go into tiers 3 and tier 4. And then in the last video, I'm going to talk about what I call the coda, which is what we are doing today to our brightest students that are potential professional mathematicians, and how they're being terribly shortchanged and what we can do about it. And that'll be the subject of my last video. So this is Dr. Dell signing off. I hope that you, at the very minimum, will go get Dr. Simmons' book and read it. No matter what else you do, that'll be one of the best $20 you'll ever invest if you're interested at all in high school mathematics. This is Dr. Dell signing off, and I will see you on the next video. Bye-bye.